Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for being patient with us as we get all the technological issues all set up. So well done, everyone. I'm talking on behalf of all of my colleagues at BTO Cymru, so Rachel, who's unfortunately unable to be here, plus Callum and Hannah, who are both here today, talking about the catching, the tagging and the tracking of the two species that are part of our project here, Echoes. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview about them and then go into some of how we caught them and why we're catching them as well. But before I do so, and I know Mary has given a lovely introduction to the Curlew, I'm going to give you a bit of a background into their winter ecology as well, just a little bit of information on them as well to help you understand the importance of these two species and why we've chosen them for this project. So Mary's already talked to you about the breeding Curlew, and you should also know that we have a huge amount of wintering Curlew here as well. The Eurasian Curlew, also called Gorvinier or Crotac, and I apologise for my pronunciation of both of those. They're the largest wader in UK and Ireland, and sadly, as we know, they're red listed in Wales, Ireland and the UK. One thing that's really important to know about our wintering populations is that actually we host good percentages of the flyway population. Now this, for those who don't know what a flyway is, the UK and Ireland are part of the East Atlantic flyway. It's one of the main migratory routes that pass around the world, and ours passes all the way from up north down through the western side of Europe down to Africa. Our Curlew may not go quite as far as that, but they're still part of this population. And Ireland hosts between 3 to 4.4%, of the population of Curlew passing through, and Wales up to 1.9%. These sort of maps from the Winter Atlas really show you how widespread Curlew are in the winter months around the coastlines of Ireland and Wales, let alone within the rest of the UK. But the Welsh population can be up to 17,500 individuals, depending on when we've taken our latest survey, and the Irish population is over 28,000 individuals. But we know that the trends are happening. Just as the BBS trends, the breeding bird trends are going down, we're losing 73% of Welsh Curlew in the past 25 years, and the Irish trends from Birdwatch Ireland that from the 23 years are showing a 43% loss. You can see this so clearly in the trends that we have presented from BTO in the top left and from Birdwatch Ireland in the bottom left, going down, and moving from the UK to Wales, we're showing the even more dramatic decline. The scales may not be quite the same, but they are showing that we are losing Curlew, unfortunately, during the wintering period. Breeding season is very important. We know a lot of the challenges come during the breeding time and the productivity of Curlew, but the whole year round is just as important. And we host a huge amount of our wintering birds, particularly Curlew. We need to make sure that they are able to be supported through the tough times. We know, as it is outside today, it's cold. That makes it harder for birds to feed, particularly those who are fond of the mudflats and the estuaries around. And over in other areas within Europe, we see that the freezing of muds often restricts the amount of food that birds can have. And so we want to understand more about what's happening during this part of the year. Having quickly gone over Curlew, because I know I don't have a huge amount of time, let's move to the Greenland white-fronted goose. Some of you may know about this species, some of you may be first introduced to it here today. It's a subspecies of the greater white-fronted goose, and sadly I'm not going to try and pronounce it in Welsh or in Irish. If someone would happily help me, I'd be very grateful. They are, again, seriously trending downwards. They're red listed in Wales in the UK, and they're amber listed in Ireland. If you look at the flyway population, so again, this coming down, Ireland hosts over 53% of the population of Greenland white-fronted geese. That's a huge amount, and it shows the importance of the Irish coastline, as you'll see in my next slide, particularly Wexford, for actually keeping hold of these people, they are people to me, to these birds passing through. Wales may only be 0.2%, but that doesn't make it any less valuable. Look at that stark contrast to the Curlew, where we see blue dots showing presence all the way around. This is the latest wintering atlas, so 7 to 011. We can see that there are little strongholds in various places around the coastline, but in Wales there are very few places. But we know that on the Dovey and Anglesey we have around 40 individuals. There may be some more hiding away. If anyone wants to report them to us, we'd be very grateful. But with the work done on echoes from our colleagues here in Aberystwyth and some of the work BTO's done with sort of many other colleagues around, we know there's around 40 individuals that are using the habitats in winter. And the Irish population, you can see the latest numbers which come from the Greenland white-fronted goose report from 2021-22. 8,289 individuals. 5,361 of those are at Wexford alone. The number's actually increasing at Wexford, but the overall trend in Ireland is going down. And that's partly because a lot of birds are congregating on Wexford. It's a great area for them. Over 6% of the Irish population of green and white-fronted geese now rest within the area of South East Ireland. The global trend is going down, and scarily, if you notice, that's a short trend. It's not the 25-year trend as we saw for the curlew. Some of the trends we're able to get within a year, and we've got lost 10% within 1 year's worth of surveys. And the Irish trend as well, the short-term trend is 14.5% down. Both of these species are important. I wasn't able to get any trends for Wales. As you might imagine, it's a small number of them going around, but I was able to find that the BTO have been looking at winter range signs and the changes between the past two atlases. We can see that the area is going down on that. And if you look at the winter sites, if we zoom in on Ireland, this is from 2010, so we haven't got a latest update on this yet. You can see that there is a huge number of birds in Wexford, and you can see the two populations. There's one, admittedly the Anglesey dot is not in the same place as it was on this map, but with Dovey and with Anglesey, you can see a couple of extinct populations as well. There used to be sites they were wintering, they're no longer there. We know that it's changing. And the Greenland white-fronted goose surveys that are carried out show really interesting trends. In Britain, we've had a peak and it's coming down very seriously. And you can see Wexford is pottering along in the right, but it doesn't mean it's any less important what's happening to these birds. So why these two species? I've given you a bit of a background into them. Mary gave you a wonderful introduction to the curlew. They both use coastal and near coastal habitats in winter. We know Echoes is looking and trying to focus on the impacts of bird habitats around the Irish Sea in winter. And between these two species, we cover a wide swathe of the near coastal environment, whether it's the estuarine areas, coastal grasslands and coastal wetlands. So by using both of these species, we're able to understand what's happening on our coasts and be able to take forwards, as you'll see in our results later this afternoon, and predict round the coast for these species as representatives of bird populations, and also two species that are doing not so well, sadly. And so hopefully we'll be able to take them on and be able to understand more about what is important to them to help conserve them. You might also ask, why are we tagging? Tagging is expensive. Why are we using this when we've got thousands of volunteers? As James pointed out, the BTO has over 40,000 volunteers on average every year gathering data for us. Why do we need more information like tagging? Birds actually do stuff outside of daylight hours. They don't just stop. They move around. They do other things overnight. And it's really hard to tell. Yes, people are getting into thermal imaging, which is great. But by putting a few tags on, and we know that we can never tag the entire population, and we'd never want to tag the entire population. Just thinking about the effort to try and catch that many curlew and green and white-fronted geese, given what we've done. Outside of daylight hours, they do a huge amount of moving around, and also they do different things to what they do during the daytime. This is maybe a little bit of a spoiler. You'll find out more later on from my colleague Callum. Tagging helps us see these movements. They're cryptic species. You might notice there's a nice photo in the middle. Can you see vaguely a Greenland white-fronted goose in the middle of it? I took that down a telescope whilst hiding in a field, 4 fields over, whilst my colleague Hannah and my other colleague Rachel were on the top of a hill about a mile away, staring at them, telling, "Stop, Catherine, I can see you, move a bit left, move a bit right, it's in front of you, can you see it?" And then peering through the brambles, I saw it and I went, "Ah!" And then I realised I had a bright blue hat on and I quickly took it off. They are cryptic species, they can hide. As Tony and Mick, who have been involved in the tagging and the observing, will tell you, they will hide in creeks. You can't see them, you know they're there. They'll move away in the salt marshes. So having these tags on allow us to pick up what they're doing outside of our points of view. Also, I am a bit of a statistician. I love quantifying my data. So I've used this wonderful word, quantifying. It basically means being able to take the numbers that we've got from what they're doing, whether it's the movements they've done, the habitats they've used, their daily patterns. We can take it and statistically put it together in a way to understand what they're doing more than just our observations. This is all complementary. It's not saying we don't include our observations as well, but we add it all together and we can put it together in a way that policymakers can take our results and do something with them. Habitat managers can take our results and do something with them. It gives them something solid to work behind. And I put in finally scenarios. This is in the general thing of day versus night, but also high versus low tide. You can go out and you can do your surveys on one day. You might have missed the night time, but you know what they're doing in the day. But what are they doing over the entire tidal cycle? You need weeks worth of data to be able to fully understand the impacts and the relationships to the tidal cycles. And so these tags allow us to gather this extra bit of information to give us more help of what they're doing. Having maybe gone over the reason for the tagging, these are the tags themselves. For those of you who happen to know, we're using path track tags, very good for being able to get great battery life for 15-minute relocations throughout the entire winter. The accuracy is less than 19 meters, which is really quite good on average with the number of satellites attached. But if we have a really good day and they get over 8 satellites, we get down to 7 meters accuracy. Brilliant for me able to associate what habitat they're linked to. We do have 2 different methods of applying these. So the birds on Curlew, we're doing blue mounting. And this means that they are only on as long as the birds are during the winter period and haven't got any extra feathers going through. It's the moment that they start molting, the feathers push the tag off and it's off. With the geese, we're using more traditionally mounted collars, which you see on a lot of projects. And these will stay on for a couple of years and again allow us to have a long-term tagging set. We're using the tags to provide us a high-quality data set of tracking points. It's one of the best sort of quality of tracking data sets for Curlew and Greenland white-fronted geese in the winter. I'm not saying it's the only one, but we're really proud of it. And it gives us a fantastic battery life throughout the winter months, which means that we don't drop on our signals and we're able to continuously understand what they're doing. Giving you a couple of maps to change from all the text I've put up. We have 3 catching locations. So we've got the Kevney Valley in southwest of Anglesey. That's where we caught both Curlew and Greenland white-fronted geese. We have the Dovey Estuary, and we're very grateful to Innes here, the RSPB Reserve, for letting us catch Curlew on there. And we've got Ballyteague and Wexford. We have got sort of Curlew that have been caught down there. I'm very grateful to colleagues like Luke, who's here today, and Reinald, who is going to be talking potentially a bit later, who've been able to come out and help us with our catching. Any of you who might have been involved in any catching will know that it is not a simple thing. It's not just a matter of going out, sticking a net up or sticking a net down on the ground if we're doing cannon netting, and suddenly you see the birds and boom, you've got them. To give an example, this January, we went out and we observed where the birds were in Ballyteague. We were like, okay, they're using this field, and they're using this field and this field. Great. We went back the next day, still using that field, maybe about 10 metres, roughly the same area. 3rd day, still in the same place. Great. We know where we're putting our net out. We went and we set out 2 nets. We ended up going, oh, let's put a 3rd net out just in case. We turned back the next morning. They weren't anywhere near those nets. And so we spent a lot of the time walking up and down fields, running around, trying to see where they were and seeing whether we could gently persuade them to move maybe nearer our nets. 4 days later, we caught 8 of them. Whoop! It was great news. There was a lot of moments of going around and staring at fields, and I think the worst moment was when we had a beautiful day on the Saturday and we could hear them coming over the seawall. It was great. I heard on the radio from Steve, who's you can see in the photograph there on the left, that they were in the right position, and then the fog came down. Oh. We could hear the curlew. We were pretty sure they were in the right place. We had no idea. I should have found the photo, but a lovely shot of me sat by the firing box waiting, whilst I can see just in the mist Steve's shape by his bobble hat with the little pom-pom on top, staring desperately, trying to observe them. I love working with birds, but I will admit that they don't behave as I would like them to. Mist netting is another thing as well. This is when we put a net out, and generally we put it out in the evening to try and catch birds coming in to roost. You can use tape lures as well, and sort of Tony is very highly experienced. I can see him staring at me today, so I'm hoping I'm saying this right. We go out and catch them as well in the evening. It's a different method, but it provides us with the ability to catch multiple birds at once, to be able to have a good cohort for each of the locations to be able to tag. To give you a few more photographs and show you the fun of it all, we have in the top left, through a scope, there are curlew in that, I promise you. There are my colleagues Rachel and Steve Dodd, who are putting a tag on a bird. And then at the bottom you have 3 of our birds showing 3 of the different sets of colourings that we've put on as well. I'll explain a bit about the colourings too. As well as putting a tag on, we individually identify each bird with a metal ring, part of the BTO scheme. It's got a unique number that will belong to that bird for the rest of its life. But also we put colourings on to allow identification in the field, and there's multiple schemes going around. And then finally they're released. In the top right, lovely moment, watching them hurl off. And one of our favourite things is to look for the wiggle of happiness. So when we put a tag on a bird, they tend to fly off, and you'll notice in the air they'll suddenly go like that, and they'll shiver. We know that's a good moment. They just readjust themselves and they'll carry on flying. We always look for that wiggle. It's a nice moment to see. The Greenland white-fronted geese are a little bit of a different story. Unfortunately, there were many things out of our control, and it's a little bit difficult to catch Greenland white-fronted geese. We're restricted by a whole load of things, but in our first winter, we managed to catch 3 on Anglesey, which was great, and that really increased our knowledge of the population on Anglesey. There was a lot of stuff that we didn't know they were doing, and again, spoilers, you'll find out later from my colleague. You can see in the top left, again, I promise you, there are Greenland white-fronted geese in that photo somewhere. The bottom left is my first view of Greenland white-fronted geese on Anglesey. I've been driving around for several weeks trying to find them, and I spotted them down the scope, and I sent that picture to Rachel going, I found them. And of course, they moved to a different location the next day, didn't they? The middle photo shows that they are still happy and moving around. That's from Colonsay up in Scotland. One of our geese that we caught on Anglesey decided to stay in Colonsay for the next 2 winters, and we know that they are there, which is great, and spotted through a camera, photographic proof. But we're showing that we do catch them and measure them and put the tags on. You can see Callum's happy face in that photograph on the right. We've actually got one of our birds. Our totals. This is probably, I've told you all about this, you should know. We got 47 curlew in total, spread across the 3 years. You can see we had a very good year in the middle, and the other 2 years, avian influenza, COVID, just restricted us from getting out as much as we wanted. But the 36 birds we caught in the first 2 years have been added into all of our results, which is fantastic. And the remaining 11 are still gathering data, and we're going to put that in for the final part of the project. The Greenland white-fronted geese, we've got the 3 we caught in Kevney. And then due to the bird being, one of our birds being up in Scotland on Colonsay, we made an additional expedition. I say we, my colleagues Rachel and Callum and others like Steve, went up and managed to get 3 additional birds up in the same flock as A2A, which is our bird up in Colonsay. And the +3 is actually at the same time, there were some other people who wanted to tag, and they've put their own tags on the same flock, and they're going to be giving us access to some of their data as well. So whilst it's not part of the Echoes project, we're going to help us understand a bit more about the population moving through there. I put this in because I mentioned colour rings, and I wanted to say colour rings have gone on all the birds caught, and I know not all of you are necessarily birders and are going to be going out and sort of reporting and everything, but if you do happen to be out with a camera, I know a lot of people go out and take photographs, if you happen to spot one of our birds or even one of our friends and colleagues' birds on other projects, please take a photograph and send it in to us. All of these sightings will be highly important for understanding what's going on with curlew and also with the Greenland white-fronted geese as well. It will go us beyond the end of the project. We know everything we're doing with our project will have long-term consequences and long-term impact, but we want to make sure that also we keep in touch with these birds. We have a responsibility to them. They're part of our project. We want to know how they're doing in future. So, the big thing, I've introduced you to everything. You actually want to see where they've been. I've decided to try and bring it all together. I've put all of the tags movements in each of the winters together for each of the species. So this is our first winter. Can you see that nice oblong shape? That's the Kevney Valley. They were making full use of it. The hot spot down near the coast is where the Kevney estuary mouth is, so all in the mudflats. But they were going way inland, much further than we'd expected. We knew curlew went inland, but not quite the direct flights they were making and what they'd been up to. There's a few movements to the side, to the northwest and the southeast, and that's often post-winter, post-midwinter when they're thinking about moving on to breeding locations. We added that to the next winter. This is when we had 10 tags, so up from 6. Look at the space they're using. They're still focused on that Kevney Valley, but we can see quite how widely they're actually investigating areas to the northwest and the southeast as well. Great news to be able to see that just adding a few more tags gives us that extra bit more of information while still solidifying the importance of the Kevney Valley. The dovey was completely different. They were so focused on the estuary, and some of my colleagues will be presenting more this afternoon about what the reasons behind some of this might be. But you can see they were so focused on the estuary. And can you see there's a nice curved shape at the bottom? That's almost perfectly matching up with the high water mark. And sort of they do pop over onto the land as well, but they're very much enjoying the loveliness that is the dovey. Ballyteague, I've had to zoom out quite a bit to fit all the points on. It's just a massive yellow in the bottom left. I'm fully aware that you might not fully see all of this, but just to give you a sense of scale, that they were again going inland and back down to the estuaries as well. Can you see there's a small little yellow dot down here? That's an island. Some of them decided to go spend the night on an island, which was really quite nice. It was like, oh, and when we sent this to MPWS, National Parks and Wildlife Service in Ireland, they went, We didn't know Curlew were using that island. Great new information. But can you also see there's some dots up there? We had a couple of birds that went on a jolly up to Wexford and back in a couple of days. They don't stay in the same areas all the time. We are learning so much about these from these tagged birds. You wouldn't have known. You'd know there were Curlew there, but how would you know they're connected? And the networking effect of different sites is just as important. Whilst we know they are focused on particular areas, as we've seen, doesn't mean that any of the other ones nearby aren't important to them. The Greenland white-fronted geese were a nice surprise as well. These are sort of the raw data with all their flights, and I've kept it on so you can actually see the routes that they were taking. We knew that they were in the Kevney Valley. People had seen them before. We tagged them. We had no idea they were using Llyn Alaw at the top quite as much as they were. Absolutely fantastic seeing these two sites. And also the occasional routes they took. You might see some dots out to the east. This is Puffin Island. They took a nice jolly of a flight around it as well. So making use of a great portion of Anglesey. Now, this is just a little bit of fun to add on to the end. I mentioned that some of our tags last quite a while. The glue-mounted tags can last up to 7 months. The reason we know that is we had 3 birds from our first 6, so 50% of our first lot of Curlew turned up again and downloaded to one of our base stations where all the data comes in after they'd been breeding. We suddenly got a huge amount of breeding data as well. And our project is not about breeding season. We're interested in the wintering season. But to show you the sense of scale of where these wintering birds come from, everyone might think, oh, they're all in the same flock. So these 3 birds were all caught in the same catch. One of them didn't leave. Spent the whole summer in Kevney. It was too good, didn't want to leave Anglesey at all. Next one went to Yorkshire and decided to make an attempt at breeding in Yorkshire. It's like, okay, that makes sense. Same flock went to Finland. Wow. 3 birds from the same wintering flock spread out, and it really shows you quite how important the Welsh and the Irish coastlines are for populations of birds breeding all the way across Europe. This is the north of Headton Bridge bird. You can see nice focused up in the moors up there. Whilst in northern Finland, we've got a nice little cluster of points up in the north of the country. But to conclude all of this, we've got 47 Curlew have been tagged over the course of this project. All of them have been tracked and given us a decent amount of data, some superb amounts of data, but all of them solid amount of data showing how they interact with the local environment. Over 221,000 locations between October and February alone from those birds, really solidifying how they're using the habitat. The 6 Greenland white-fronted geese that we've focused on, we've tagged in 2 different Januaries. Those first 3 birds gave us 15,500 locations alone. Again, superb amount, and that's just from January and February, let alone from the rest of the area that they've been travelling through. I hope that's given you a nice overview into our tagging and tracking, and if you want to have any questions, please feel free to find me in the break.